You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 39. This podcast is dedicated to CIRCUS. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders, those who usually sit in the audience, to go backstage and into this world. Hey friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna, and I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. If this is your first time tuning into the podcast, you should know that this whole operation is produced pretty much entirely by me. There's no outside company. I'm not sponsored by any big corporations. I'm actually hunched in an empty room in my hostel in Bangkok so I can record this podcast without any outside sounds. And that means that I can say what I want, I can interview whoever I want, and I can do this all because I have the support of listeners like you. If you want to support the podcast, if you like what you're listening to, go to patreon.com/theartistathlete. Before I introduce my guest this week, I want to make a little correction. I got fact-checked about my flying trapeze fact from episode 37 with Kate. Ryan Murray hit me up on Instagram. Hey, Ryan, to tell me that, quote, the best record of who performed the triple in flying trapeze was a woman, Lena Jordan, in 1897 at age 16 in Sydney, followed by Ernest Clark in 1909. Cadona was the first performer to actually perform the triple in every show. So, there you go. If you would like a more factually sound, better produced podcast, go to patreon.com/theartistathlete and become a Patreon. Maybe someday I'll have enough money to pay a whole team. But for now, I have to rely on the kindness of fellow circus peeps to keep me honest. Thanks so much, Ryan. I'm really enjoying Otama Tuesdays. My guest today is Mandi Orozco. Mandi grew up on stage in Orlando, Florida, doing special events for Disney and working in the competitive dance circuit. Her training led her to the École Nationale du Cirque, a competitive circus school in Montreal, Canada, where she specialized in aerial tissue, also known as aerial silks or those ribbon things, as well as contortion and duo trapeze. She worked for 4 years as a principal role in Cirque du Soleil's show Dralion before leaving to pursue a career as a freelance circus artist in Europe. At the time of this recording, she is currently on the cast of Fortune Hunters, which is at Palazzo in Berlin, which is also where this interview took place. In her spare time, she runs marathons. Here's my interview with Mandi Orozco. So, Mandi, I have a confession to make, which is like I always say your last name a different way.
Everybody always says my last name a different way. I even say it a different way depending on what country we're in. So
nice.
Orozco is usually the Americanized way of saying it. But,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Mandi Orozco.
Mandi Orozco.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yay! I'm excited to have you. Can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Who I am? Oof, that's an ever-evolving question. I am a circus artist. I started as a dancer. I switched into circus and have been working as a... Oof, how do I answer who I am?
I don't mean to give you an existential crisis over it.
It's also it's just the kind of day for me also too. But yeah, I'm a circus artist who has been working in the industry for a couple of years now. Worked for various companies and have now been freelancing for quite a long time. And yeah, just trying to continue to explore what circus has and where I want to go and see how I can continually develop art. I was also a bit shy of it. Let's see.
Yeah. And you started, I remember you telling me, as like a Mickey Mouse squad.
Maybe that's a better place to start. It's true. Yeah, I've kind of been on stage my whole life. My mom always said to me, like, I wonder how you end up in this profession. And then she kind of realized, oh, actually, it's just always been that way. From singing and dancing as a kid with really kid-like singing and dancing, but nonetheless being put on the stage at 3 or 4 years old, something like that. And I was actually born in Denver, but we moved to Orlando when I turned 8. And the singing and dancing kids group that I had been involved with was instructed by an ex-Disney performer who still had contacts in the industry. And so then I found myself singing and dancing on stage for Disney as a kid, which was super cool. It was intense. It was a really early introduction to show business. My mom really did it for fun. It was always this thing of like, if you're having fun, we can stay here. But a lot of the other stage moms that were there were nuts. And we would shoot, I don't know, video stuff, or sometimes have shows with like Stevie Wonder and crazy cool stuff. But yeah, you know, in between sets or shooting something at 5 a.m. in the morning, and it can, believe it or not, get relatively cold in Florida in the winter at that time. And just seeing moms, you know, freaking out on their kids to try to get them more and more in the front row and stuff. And my mom always just had this attitude of, do you want to be here? Are you having fun? And that's kind of what kept me with it. And that aspect of it kind of then turned into a more serious form of dance training. I dropped all the kind of Mickey Mouse stuff eventually and went for a pretty intense competitive dance upbringing after that. Jazz, tap, ballet, lyrical, hip-hop, all that stuff, but quite an intensive, what people see now as this reality TV show.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, Dance Moms or that kind of thing.
Quite like that is how I then grew up. But that's where my formative training actually began.
And then when did Circus become?
Circus was an interesting one. That's also a big Orlando-related thing, because my mom took me to see La Nuba, which was the resident show that's at Disney, or was at Disney, for my 12th birthday. And I literally watched the show and came out of there having, at 12 years old, made up my life decision of what I wanted to do and said, Mom, I want to do that. And we had no connection to circus. You know, dance was the most artistic thing, or outside of kind of the normal knowledge of gymnastics and this kind of stuff. But, you know, my mom gave me the typical, follow your dreams, do what you want to do. And without really knowing a way into the industry, I just kept up with my dance training, but kind of became a circus nerd. I remember, you know, watching Isabelle Chassé on Quidam videos that I could download and this kind of stuff. And I was I was captivated by it from then. But I got hired by a company when I was 18, who did kind of gala corporate stuff. I got hired as a dancer. And they actually had a small aerial training space there and asked me if I was interested to start training aerial stuff. And of course, I was super interested. I can remember the first time I got to touch a tissue, I think I almost cried.
Wow.
Just because it was something that I wanted to do for so long, and finally I had access to it and, you know, of course, trained some skills with them and started doing a few super small gig type stuff. But it was actually one of the other performers for that company who mentioned, hey, you know, there's a circus school in Montreal. And I was like, circus school? I didn't know that's a thing, actually. And she put the idea in my head about the auditions, and I went home and told my mom. And my mom was like, cool, so we go to the auditions. And it took me a really long time to decide if I even wanted to audition or not. I have always naturally been very flexible, and strength for me, it was nearly impossible, especially at that age. When I started doing tissue, I couldn't do a single pull-up. So the idea of going to this audition, to this, you know, school that seemed godlike to me at that time, you know, just seemed completely impossible. And we went back and forth about it for a few weeks. She's like, are we going? Are we not going? Are we going? Are we not going? And finally, there was one day where she said to me, she was like, we have to decide if you want to go, because we need to book airline tickets. And I said, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to waste your money. I don't want to do this audition. And she said, you're never going to know what happened if you don't try. And I said, fine, fuck it, let's go. I don't care. And so it was really fine, fuck it, I don't care. And next thing, then we had the airline tickets, and the auditions were horrifying. You know, I remember on the day before the audition, we went to go see where the circus school was, and we ended up meeting a few other people who were kind of doing the same thing, another girl and her mother who were also there. And the girl, you know, had biceps the size of my head and said that she had already auditioned last year and that she was here to audition again, and started telling me about the 4-day audition process. And I think all the color went out of my face, and like just listening to
so
what
you didn't know
I had no clue.
anything about
I didn't know anything. I was, you know, doing it relatively blind, and for whatever reason, I didn't think, you know, like, hey, maybe I should. I mean, I knew that there were some physical evaluations and some dance portions, but like very, very basic. And yeah, she was just telling me that she got cut on day 2, and there's this and there's that, and I started looking around at the first day of audition, or no, even before that, my poor mother, I think she actually had the same outlook on the whole thing, because her pep talk to me on the first morning going into circus school in Montreal, where it was minus 40, total snow. We came from Orlando, not knowing what we're getting ourselves into. She said, if you get cut early, we can just fly back home sooner.
Aww,
that was her pep talk. It was like, it's okay if you get cut. We'll get out of the snow and go home. I think my 18th birthday was actually at the end of that week. I think I was 17 during the audition times.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe all of that started 1 year earlier than I previously recounted. But yeah, her pep talk was like, when you get cut, we'll fly home early. And I was like, all right, cool. And somehow that really did give me a bit of confidence. And, from first day to the second day, it got, drastically cut, and I still got, I was still able to continue. And the second day, there was, a bunch of dance stuff, and then the flexibility, which was obviously a bit more of my strong suit. And to my surprise, I guess I didn't research too much, because then when they said, okay, you need to present an act on the third day when you get through, and I was like, fuck my life. I didn't prepare an act, and I didn't expect to get this far. So we got back to our hotel room, and my mom made a bubble bath for me and set the laptop up on the toilet next to me, and I picked a song and played it over 1,400 times and tried to create this act in the bathtub the night before I was going to do it. And yeah, the short version of the story is I ended up getting accepted into circus school, which is still miraculous to me.
At ENC, the National
at ENC
Circus School
in Montreal.
Yeah.
That's still a brain fuck.
That's a nutty story.
I don't know. I still don't know. And
you auditioned on Tissue.
I auditioned on Tissue, yeah, which ended up being my specialty.
Yeah.
But yeah. So.
What a story. That's nutty.
Yeah, and it was, my mom still loves to recount the story too, just because of this pep talk of it's okay, honey, when you get cut, we'll go home early. But.
Love that.
Yeah, no, and.
But it gave you permission almost to fail.
It did. It really, really did. And it was kind of the same thing, her pep talk of this whole, it was really just a simple sentence from her saying, you're never going to know if you don't try, in terms of whether we were even going to go to the audition or not. And I was like, yeah, okay, I can't argue with that. Fuck it, let's go.
Yeah.
So there were so many chance factors where I actually didn't want to pursue the next step because it scared me. And then you find that things kind of move, destiny in a certain way, they kind of do move forward. And the training at the circus school was obviously then paramount to my entire career later.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that training or that time at the school?
Oh yeah, that was really special. It was an even more magnified sense of, wow, I don't know anything about circus.
Wow.
I was put into a whole new world, and a lot of people who get accepted into the school are ex-gymnasts. And me coming from the dance world obviously gave me a step up in the whole movement side of life, but I had a shit ton of work to do to catch up in the strength. And it's something I still have to work at way more than flexibility. But again, I think at the audition when I was there, I did maybe a pull-up and a half. Just out of sheer adrenaline, and even that was, I think, the most I had ever done in my life. And so, coming in as a tissue specialist, not being able to pull your own body weight is a little bit embarrassing. And I can remember, the schedule is pretty full on, and you touch on everything. You do handstands, acro, dance, acting, you have classes and everything, which was really cool to then get introduced to. A lot of the handstands was a total foreign concept to me, and I'm still a bit of a noodle in terms of body composition. Right. So I was like, wait, I need to have, what? It was cool to get introduced to all those different topics, but it also kind of showed me how much work I had to do. But in a lot of senses in my life, I think I've very often come into into situations as the underdog. Even when I started dance class all those years ago, the real formative training, I really started with about 12 years old. And I was put into a class with, dancers who were a good 3 years younger than me, which is significant at that age.
Yeah.
Who could literally dance circles around me. And it's just, sheer willpower and...
because I feel like, people don't like to do things they're not good at or feel behind at. Mm-mm. But it sounds like you just kind of stuck it out.
I did stick it out, and I don't want to make it seem like it was easier, that I have, concrete iron willpower more than I think anybody does. It's just, I think when you connect with something that you're passionate about and you really want to pursue, you can find that kind of, fuck, I'm going to stick this out.
I just like got goosebumps when you said that. That's such a great way to put it.
Yeah,
so
I was so humiliated, to be honest. Like when I started in these dance classes, for example, I would not let my mom watch me. If she came even 10 minutes early, because they had this super typical window in this separate waiting room where the parents came to pick their kids up and they could watch the dance classes or whatever. And if my mom would come even 10 minutes before the dance class finished and watch the last 10 minutes, I would flip out. I told her she wasn't allowed to. She would wait in the car because I was so humiliated. I knew how far behind I was and how much work I had to do. And that took me a few years to shake, you know, and finally she was pissed. She's like, look, dude, I'm paying for these dance classes. I eventually get to watch you. And so eventually I kind of grew past that, I think, once my confidence started to blossom. But that wasn't an easy process. And then the whole situation kind of repeated itself in circus school. Again, coming in as what I felt like was the underdog. And I'm like, oh crap, here we go again, you know, like... And it's both super inspiring and also very humbling. And I often, in those type of situations, feel, or I think many people do, you feel, you know, crippled by inability. And then that's either going to completely stop your progress, or it can be eventually a motivation for that, which is a really beautiful process when it happens like that. But even within the process, when you are moving forward, it doesn't always feel that beautiful.
I think that's such an interesting thing. Like, circus artists, I feel like, are some of the most humble people I know. But at the same time, it's an industry that requires you to sell yourself.
Yeah, I was nodding my head, and I realized that the podcast listeners can't hear me nodding my head. I was nodding my head. It's true. It's very true.
So how do you think that you combat that?
To be honest, I think it's, again, a bit of a reoccurring theme because, you know, I'm lucky enough, or you're here, so I'm a bit lucky you get to see the show that we're doing here in Palazzo in Berlin tonight. But I've recently developed a new prop, a new requisite. I forget the English word anymore. I'm a bit language confused. I've developed a new apparatus. There we go.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I now feel like the process is somewhat repeating itself, you know, obviously in varying degrees, because now I have a broader skill set than I used to. But and
a reputation.
Yeah, but that's also a double-edged sword, you know? Like, in some ways it can also work against you because people and ultimately myself have a certain expectation of myself. And when you're still in a process of growing, it's normal to be maybe 2 steps behind, or, you know, not as confident or not as sure, especially when something's completely new and doesn't exist. But you judge yourself just as hard, or I do.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think it's actually a process that kind of coincides with art in general, and it's maybe not just me, but this reoccurring process of underdog to, oh cool, I got this, and okay, now I don't just have this, I am this, and people see me for this. It's a part of art, I think, or that's what I'm learning anyway, because for it to be repeating itself again and you see these cycles, I can't even say that it necessarily gets easier. You can at least say, okay, I've done this before, and you have a bit of experience behind you, which is a bit of a motor. But in terms of actually combating it, it's a constant struggle to believe in yourself and believe in your ideas. And I think it's a super stereotypical thing to say, but I've gotten better at trusting the process. And even I think I'm learning that my weaknesses can actually become strengths in some senses. Like, even with a new apparatus that I've developed, I'm not as good of a hand balancer. I can do a few handstands, especially in bendy positions, because I'm extremely bendy. But I would never call myself anything close to a hand balancer. And, you know, when I'm developing new stuff on this new apparatus, I, you know, of course come across and I'm like, man, if I had stronger handstand skills, I could, you know, do this and this and this, or that and that and that. And I'm like, okay, that's not your strong suit. How do you work around that? And so creative solutions in terms of what do I have, what's unique to me, that I can bring to this already unique idea. But it's relevant also not even just to this apparatus. I think that's a good point, in general, to ask yourself, my weaknesses are one thing, but there are also things that are then unique to me, and even those weaknesses can be productive if they're used in a creative sort of solution. Yeah.
I love that.
Thanks.
That's great. So you graduated from the school. Beautiful tissue act.
Thank
it's
you.
like one of my favorites.
Oh, I'm turning super red for those who can't see.
I remember meeting you and can be like, when you did it to Kronos Quartet, and it was so awesome.
Oh, yeah. That was also a process. That's funny. Yeah. Wow, you're taking me back. I'm starting to feel old also, too.
Girl, tell me about it.
Yeah, I graduated 2010, which is 9 years ago now. Wow. And as I finished, in the months before I finished ENC, I got an offer from Cirque du Soleil, which for me was pretty full circle. That was like the opposite moment of this underdog. That was, holy crap, I was a 12-year-old girl who literally dreamed to work for Cirque du Soleil, and whatever it was, 9 years later or something like that, I was a main character in one of their shows. And that's huge. It was huge. I mean, yeah, it's what I said to you earlier outside, you know, like, and for me, the 12-year-old girl was saying, hey, I'm wishing to be the tooth fairy, and then suddenly it happens, you know. It seemed so outlandish when I was young, and for it to actually happen was amazing, and also in a way challenging, because even at that moment, I knew, like, wow, I'm 21, or at the time I'm 21, and I accomplished my life dream. I hope I'm not going to have a now what.
Oh, no.
You know, because, like, having a life dream, whether it's outlandish or not, is also a motor and gives you, you know, motivation to work towards something. And I was like, okay, I did it. And obviously there were lots of things to still explore within that. But eventually down the road, I did kind of come to a now what. But that's another story. I worked for Dralion for 4 years. And we toured the US and Canada and then internationally after that.
What was that like?
Oh, I'm super happy I did it straight out of school.
Interesting.
Because we did an arena tour, which means you change cities every week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool schedule in some senses. You have 10 weeks on and 2 weeks off, pretty much year round. So you actually get more vacation time than you do on a big top. But you're traveling a lot more. And I was super just overall grateful to be there, and there's a lot of ins and outs to learn with Cirque. You know, it's a huge company, and just the magnitude with which they work and the size of the shows that they're touring that frequently, and it was pretty magical just to be a part of that, and I learned a lot. But for sure, by the time I got to year 3, 4, something like that, I started to look for more. And I found other things for sure to inspire me and keep me motivated. We were actually hired for a duo tissue act, and because of the height differences in some of the arenas, we couldn't always do the tissue act. Sometimes they asked us to do solos when the ceiling was too low. And so we proposed with my partner that we develop a duo straps act, which was obviously a discipline that I had never touched. And so we worked quite hard on that for a while. Cirque ended up buying the act once we were finished with it, and so then we got to alternate between duo straps and duo tissue, which was really cool. It also felt personal. I picked up a new discipline. There was a lot of work in the process, and for Cirque to end up hiring the act was also a pretty big accomplishment.
Yeah, that's great.
I started doing half marathons and triathlons. I started studying psychology, and I'm still almost now, I mean, it's a slow boat to China for sure, but I've been doing my psychology degree on the side all these years. Yeah, so that was something to keep me busy, but by the end I could realize the show was a little bit autopilot for me, and you lose a bit of that emotional connection to what you're doing because you don't have to think about it anymore. I think I finished with like 987 or 97, something just short of 1,000 shows in 4 years. And so, yeah, after close to 1,000 shows, you lose a bit of heart from it. And when I was like, okay, I'm doing...
It's like the opposite experience of, like, being a beginner.
For sure. Exactly. And after I was like, okay, I'm doing 10 shows a week, changing cities every week, and trying to find triathlons that I can finish on a Sunday and then have to do a double show after. I was like, okay, I think I need some sort of change.
But so you finished with Cirque.
I finished with Cirque. That was an interesting coincidence as well. I, on a tour break, actually came here to Berlin because my friend Kaylin Schmidt was performing for the Seven Fingers in the Chameleon during the show Loft. And I visited her twice on tour breaks that we had from Dralion. And the second time that I visited her, I would often, like, enter their backstage just as they were finishing the show, and whatever, we would go out to dinner or something like that. But one of the days I came in a bit earlier, and suddenly I kind of had everybody's attention in the backstage, and I was super confused. Mandi, yeah? Do you want to work? No. I'm on tour break. And they were like, well, there's this show that one of the other girls, Anna Kachenko, had actually done before, called Dummy, and the show had somebody who was injured, and I was like, oh, that's really unfortunate. And they're like, they need somebody for tissue and contortion. I was like, fuck me. I can't say no to that. That's just like mean. It's, like my two specialties. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't too many shows. It was like 4 shows or something like that. And so I ended up on a train the next day to Hanover and kind of met the whole Berlin circus scene with that whole thing. They coincidentally needed someone to cover the first week of shows in the Chameleon and asked me if I was available. And I was like, I'm on tour with Cirque. It's not going to happen. What are the dates? And it just happened to fall on our next tour break. So I found myself flying back to Berlin and performing the first week or 2 weeks, something like that, in Chameleon. In the meanwhile, a bit of a romance budded between me and one of the cast members who was also here in Berlin. I decided at that point, him and I eventually, 6 months later or so, decided that it was a bit more serious and I was eventually going to move to Berlin then and quit Cirque du Soleil and just kind of get connected and see what the whole freelancing world was all about. But having connected here with some work options, the people from Dummy were super interested in that project and also future projects. So I had a bit of an idea that I could somewhat stably jump into something. But it was a bit of a blind jump, for sure.
Oh, really?
I mean, for sure,
Yeah,
when you have a super stable job, and that's the other reason I was super lucky to do Cirque while I was so young, is because you have a bit of financial stability after that. You have zero expenses, at that point. I bought a house when I was 21, kind of done all the checkoff lists, so I had the freedom to jump into this freelancing career with a bit of security saying, okay, I've touched on the work base here and there's interest. And of course I was in love, so then you don't care anyway.
Yeah, you're like, whatever, I'll move to Berlin. What a great place to be in love.
Yeah, coincidentally that ended about 4 months after I had quit Cirque and moved here.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so that, ended up being the downside of that. But I decided to stay.
Yeah.
And since then have been living here for 5 years now, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, and freelancing was then a whole new adventure. That was also a pretty good slap in the face of like, oh, wait, how does this work? And kind of figuring out the ins and outs of that. But
sure.
Yeah.
You certainly have, obviously.
I try my best, for sure. In terms of work, I've been super, super, super lucky. But when I also contemplate that a little bit, it's an interesting topic because there are a lot of people, especially in this industry, who work very, very hard. And I definitely consider myself a hard worker. But I can also, there's a certain amount of luck, a certain amount of opportunity, and a certain amount of hard work, and some holy triad combination of those 3 things that I don't have the exact formula figured out for, because there are also people who do work super hard in this industry and who don't have as easy of a time finding work. I mean, I'm not going to say I've gone for periods without work. I do have holes in my schedule. It's not that I'm turning down offers left, right, and center. But for being such a relatively unstable choice of work, I've been relatively very lucky. But yeah, it's a topic that I often think about in terms of what is it that makes some people more successful in that, and I think it's a very complicated thing. There's so many variables that go into it, but I do recognize myself as very lucky because I know there are people who also work their ass off and don't have as easy of a time.
This podcast is brought to you by The Artist Athlete. Did you know that The Artist Athlete is more than just a podcast? It's a growing online resource for students of the aerial arts to deepen their journey to badassery by accessing techniques approved by physical therapists and master coaches in the industry. Our current spotlight is on the fundamentals of aerial alignment, a practical manual for hanging upside down. This online manual is a step-by-step guide. It is complete with photos, videos, and exercises that you can implement immediately to help you gain the strength and awareness you need for an aerial practice that promotes shoulder health and longevity and good posture upright, so you don't walk around like a gorilla. But don't just take my word for it. Here's Circus physical therapist Dr. Jen Crane of Cirque Physio to tell you more.
The fundamentals of aerial alignment is an absolute must-have for every aerialist of every level. I can't even tell you how many shoulder injuries I treat that are a direct result of rushing past the basics in an attempt to get a trick too soon. In the manual, Shannon deconstructs the fundamentals, including the correct muscular engagement to safely arrive in these positions and the rationale for why it matters. Of course, in addition to all of these fabulous pearls of wisdom, the book is also ridiculously fun to read. It's been lovingly garnished with the Shannon humor we all know and love.
Thanks, Jen. Cirque Physio is also featured in the book to give scientific insight into why it all works. Pick up your copy today by going to theartistathlete.com and clicking e-manuals. Listeners of the podcast can get a 10% discount by typing in the offer code PODCAST at checkout. Again, that's theartistathlete.com, offer code PODCAST. Now, back to the show. I think the other thing that makes you interesting is what you said before. You bought a house when you were 22. Not every artist graduates from Cirque, or like leaves Cirque du Soleil. Graduates. Not every artist gets out of the school. A lot of them go straight to Cirque.
Yeah.
Not everyone has the mindset to like build wealth in that way, or think about money, or freelance, and you really are smart about the business side as well.
I try. I think I had some good training with that in terms of my family when I was young. You know, they instilled some pretty funny, I don't even know what we called it, a 401j. My grandfather's name was John.
Okay.
And so instead of a 401k, it was a 401j. And so from the age of whatever, there was only 3 grandkids on my family side, and for all 3 of us kids, they did a 401j, which basically meant from age young until 18, you could deposit money in this bank account, and whatever you deposited, my grandfather would match us.
Oh, wow.
And you couldn't withdraw money, or you could withdraw money, but then you weren't matched again until you reached the point that you were originally at. So it was kind of a savings plan.
Oh,
and funnily enough,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, it was super smart. And funnily enough, I had a really hard time after that ever saying 401k correctly, because my whole life I grew up saying 401j. Still slips out occasionally in the bank or on the phone, and people are like, what? But yeah, stuff like that when I was little put finances in the forefront of my mind. Or I did have, I did babysit when I was a kid, and I did have jobs when I was a teenager doing normal stuff, serving in restaurants or whatnot. And growing up in the States, you do have a car, and then you need car insurance and gas and some of this stuff. But the business side of circus is a bit more of an enigma for sure. I was also super lucky because, circus school is a lot, in Montreal anyway, it's much cheaper than a typical American college.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough between my mom and my grandparents that they covered my tuition and my housing and everything. So
that's really nice.
I had some savings that I put into it. Between whatever combination of that we did, I didn't come out of school with any debts. And that's huge, because I also do know that even with circus school, it's not as expensive as a normal American college. But if you don't have your family funding you, you still come out with student loans. So that was a huge plus to come out already I came out with 0. I can remember for like the last 2 months rent, I ended up changing a few gold earrings that I had and didn't use anymore because I was 200. Mm-hmm. So I really came out at pretty much nothing, but to still immediately start and jump into a job and not have any loans behind you was a huge benefit to all of that for sure.
But then to save on top of that, I guess, from that financial...
Absolutely. I think with circuits, I would say relatively easy, but maybe that's kind of a relative thing to say, because it is true some people do get out of companies like that and not necessarily save any money, but that's a bit of a wonder to me, especially on an arena tour, because they do treat you very well. You get a tour allowance, you obviously have your show fee, then you're fed at least 5 days out of the week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So the 2 days a week you have free, maybe you go out for kind of a fancy dinner, but I had a few good shopping sprees and stuff in there too. Sure. But for the most part, you're busy enough that it's... I think if I really would have tried to come out with nothing from Cirque, I would have had to really try.
Okay.
Because you are so busy and on tour and, whatever, you do a lot of double shows, so you end up spending, the majority of your day there, which is, I would say, a helpful way to save money for sure.
Yeah. Especially
compared to, let's say, more of a normal job where, you have a car or a house or apartment.
Right, you have all this, overhead.
Exactly.
Just to live a life.
And straight out of school, that was, again, a huge financial benefit.
That's amazing. Yeah. So favorite projects now?
Favorite projects now. Okay.
Or maybe ever, let's say.
Ever. That's a really good question. Favorite projects ever.
Dummy seems like a really cool show to work on.
Dummy was super fun. Dummy is something that holds a pretty strong place in my heart because it's what gave me the courage to finally jump ship from Cirque. Because there was definitely a side of me that felt like an idiot. You're like, you have a very comfy salary, you have a very comfy lifestyle, and you want to jump into the abyss. Good decision, bad decision, not sure. So in that way, and just the people that I met, and I'm obviously very connected to those people still here in Berlin, so that's kind of it pulls on a heartstring for sure, that show. But the show is still super fun and still running. other fun, crazy shows. You know what's actually really interesting? All the shows that I end up doing have their pros and cons. I think a lot of, rather than one overall big project that was my favorite ever, have actually kind of been some of the smaller projects that haven't necessarily gotten so much recognition on the circus world industry radar or whatever, because those are the ones where I learned the most. For example, we did 2 years ago now, we did a show called Liar. Well, that's the abbreviation. It's actually Life is a Rehearsal with Remy, which is a bit of a funny story because he was the romance of Dummy. He was the reason that I ended up moving to Berlin. And even though we didn't work out as a couple, we stayed super good friends and still are. And even after we broke up, he had some ideas for creating a circus show that he had talked about for years, since we were together and then after. And one day I really said to him, I was like, Remy, you're either going to shut up and stop telling me your ideas that you're not doing, or we're going to make them happen. And for whatever reason that time, because it wasn't the first time I said it, but I guess that time it kind of clicked for him, and I told him I would help him. And we did a month-long creation without any big expectations. At the end of it, we planned to do a presentation in front of, kind of some Berlin friends, scene, whatever.
Cool. It was just the two of you.
It ended up being the three of us. Well, originally he wanted to create a solo show. Mm-hmm. And then his ideas kind of shifted. And I remember him calling me excited one day and saying, okay, here's the new show. It's 3 people, and giving me some of the ideas. And he's like, I need you in the show. I was like, Remy, you don't have to write me into the show just because I said I would help you. I will help you regardless. He's like, no, because the show's loosely based on his life. And so he's like, I need you to play the love interest. I was like,
oh, God.
Really? Okay. But that's what it was. And then the other person who did the original creation was John Young. And we did a month-long creation in April in a very, 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 very cold, non-heated, dilapidated building in Berlin. And yeah, that was super crazy. It was the first time I ever tried to jump a bit more in this creative seat. And I learned so much, even just from kind of being on the creative production side and helping him with that. And we still do it. We did it last year still quite a few times, and it's a very slow project in terms of, you can't say like, oh yeah, we've done 250 shows or anything like that.
Right, but yeah.
It starts to get a bit more recognition and stuff like that. But the more valuable side of it is how much I learned during the process.
What do you think are some of the biggest lessons you learned being on the creative creation side in that way?
It's interesting because you realize how hard you have to work to actually, the process of creation is painful in terms of just the work ethic that's required.
Yeah.
And again,
well, even in like a 5-minute act,
absolutely,
the work ethic required.
Absolutely. And it just makes you realize that on then a broader scale, when you start with nothing and you want to make a show, of course the ideas are one thing, but then, it was more of his show and he's definitely the director. But being a big part of that, then we already realized, we were in a non-heated building in April, and actually I was doing shows in the Winter Garden at that point at night, so I would do creation with him during the day and then shows in the Winter Garden at night for a month, which was also a bit intense. But, okay, now we need space heaters because we actually can't function in this building because it's too cold. We need everything, just from costumes to this to that. It's exactly the same thing that you mean for an act, in terms of how much work to attention to detail, all of just the tiny things that go into it that you can forget. Like I think I still have the original notebook from when we did that creation, and I looked back on it recently because we brought the show back a couple times last year and toured it, and just reading through the original notes is super funny. The little things that you have to remember, and even bringing it back this year was interesting because we played in so many different places. And when you're a 3-person show, it's also a very detail-oriented show. There's a shit ton of props. And, packing yourselves and organizing the transport and doing your own rigging in, these tiny theaters that don't usually have circus, and how can we, and, working with lights that are actually made from more of a theater school, so they're rather elementary, and oh fuck, it actually looks like shit. We need to go rent lights from this place to make it look like something. And it just makes you realize how much goes into circus shows. Even, this is going to sound funny, I hope it doesn't sound bad, I mean it positively, even if you see a shitty show, but it's on stage, if you don't like the show, you have to respect the fact that they did it. because there's still a certain amount of organization. They still had ideas that were pursued and action was taken. And that's more than some people can say.
That's so real.
Some people can say...
That's so real.
Yeah. Joe Pinzon, another one, you know, like he had a dream and he just did it. And that's the thing where between having
Not that Joe's show was a shitty show.
No. Thank you for that correction. No, but just this, exactly. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Joe's gonna hear this and be like,
he's gonna be like, fuck you, Mandy. Hi, Joe.
Hey.
No, but just this point of the process that comes in between of having an idea and actually making something happen. There's a spectrum of shit in between that you're going to wade through, and that's also part of the joy you come out with at the end, and that's what I'm now facing with this whole, you know, treadmill thing. Like, this is, the treadmill is the new apparatus that I built, and this thing is a robot, and even just the building process, the specs of it, the original time of sitting down with the guy who ended up engineering it was already 2 years ago, and you just realize things take time. And I consider myself an okay patient person, but my dreams are just, you know, on hyperspeed compared to reality. And so sometimes you have to step back and say, I am making progress. It's not as fast as I want, you know, just to kind of check back in with yourself and say, hey, these are the things I have accomplished, because usually all you see ahead of you is the shit you haven't done.
Oh, that's such a good point. And all you feel from day to day is the fact you were like...
that you're not where you want to be
water,
yet. Exactly. And that's...
Sure.
Yeah, it's hard, but to still... know how much work there is ahead of you, but to still continue to choose to take action it's hard, but it's also, I think, the most rewarding part. And I think it's what's kept me in circus, because you can always find a new challenge. You can always find something new to pursue, a new skill to hone, a new idea to have, a new artistic concept to develop. It's unending, which is both overwhelming and really unique to circus, I think.
Do you have any particular fascinations? I think about other art forms, like Monet became fascinated with water lilies, or like Pollock became fascinated with like splatter painting.
Interesting.
Do you find yourself when you're creating, like, working along certain themes or like motifs?
Yeah, I would. That's a really cool question. I think...
Thanks.
No, that's a really cool question. I think in some ways the treadmill was kind of a good representation for me for that. The reason it came about was also because running is very integral to who I am. I'm big into running. I love what it does for my headspace. It's, without sounding cheesy, it's transformative in a lot of ways. And also just from a metaphorical standpoint, those ideas of running actually being important to me as a thing, but also what it represents is important to me. And so that's kind of where this idea for a treadmill was born. That, and I was totally flabbergasted. Oh, I never use that word. I was amazed by Fuerza Bruta, this image, because it's this image of this sprint, which is, so it's such a clear image of struggle, but overcoming struggle.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a recurring theme for me in some senses.
Yeah.
And the
it's interesting also, Lucia has a treadmill on it now too.
Yeah, it's
true.
True. It's getting there. It's becoming a thing. Watch, it's going to be a thing.
I know, totally. Treadmills in the next...
It's super interesting, and just the simple idea of putting one foot in front of the other, it goes back to kind of this thing of taking action, because sometimes you're like, fuck, how do I do this? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And usually, instead of looking at the huge picture or mission that's in front of you, you just go, what's my next single step? And it's step after step after step, that takes you somewhere. And for me, that's kind of, that in and of itself is a struggle. And so this idea, I can, as a motif for your question before, I think a lot of the music choices I have, a lot of the act choices that I have, and of course now with this whole treadmill thing, I'm super fascinated with struggle and overcoming struggle. I even kind of realized it more recently in the fact that when I need to turn my brain off at night, I have been more into watching biography or autobiography stuff lately on Netflix or, whatever you can find, YouTube stuff. And I was like, why am I fascinated with other people's lives? And I realized that I'm also attracted to the ways that people have had to take to do something that's important to them. the process of that is interesting to me. And, you know, everybody has struggles of whatever, but really the difficulties that people have and how it led them to something that they didn't expect. And I mean, I guess you could call that life in a weird way,
Yeah,
but
totally.
I'm getting all existential over here. No, but I just this concept of overcoming struggle and the beauty that comes from it is super interesting. And you can then interpret that in many different ways, whether it's just a feeling you want to put into an act or whether it's something, a physical image like the treadmill, or it's not as beautiful as like a water lily or splattered paint, but different ideas of interpreting struggle
like,
is kind of cool.
Humans overcoming struggle, like what could be more beautiful? I think, right?
I hope.
Like,
I hope. I mean, yeah, life is a struggle, but I think the most rewarding times often come from, it goes back to the whole underdog thing, you know, from the beginning.
Sure.
It's like when you can look back at something and say, I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, and now I've mastered that.
Right.
I think there's no greater personal satisfaction. And then it motivates you to do something next, and it's kind of
and then when you realize
cycle.
you're starting to phone it in, instead of just like riding that wave, you're like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah, peace.
Let's go do this.
What's next?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, for
What
sure.
are the types of work that you find yourself turning down, or that you're like kind of allergic to in a weird way?
Shitty paid galas. That's one thing for sure. You know, it's an interesting topic for me as well, because in terms of being business savvy, what you said before, I had a bit of a hard time coming out of Cirque and even knowing or realizing how people charge. What do you charge for a show fee outside of Cirque? What, you know, getting to know the business side of a freelancer. And also specifically to the gala industry. That was very new to me at the time. I had never done a gala because I literally went straight to Cirque du Soleil. And it was a bit of a learning curve, but I had, you know, super strong artists around me who were a good example, and I could talk pretty openly with them about it. But what I've come to realize is a lot of people do undersell themselves, and it's not helpful to the entire industry. But I always had a hard time saying a certain amount for a gala because, you know, you feel like you're not worth that amount of money, or that it's a big sum of money or whatever. But it's again kind of this retrospective thing of how many hours did I put into developing this 5-minute or 6-minute or whatever minute act.
Sure.
You know, even my costume might need repairs, and I have to pay my gym membership in order to stay, you know, fit enough to do what I do. And it's easy to forget all of that, and so people do undersell themselves, and then the entire industry is eventually affected in terms of the value of circus.
Right.
So that's a little bit of an allergy for me, for sure.
Cool. I mean, not cool that that's the case, but like, yeah, I can totally see that.
No, it's an important one for sure. But I can also understand it, because I had a hard time being like, I need this, and feeling like
I think something that's interesting about that kind of work is like knowing the market and knowing what kind of thing you are to sell. Does that make sense?
It does. It's definitely difficult. I think it's super valuable to reach out to people who are doing it, especially if you're, you know, good enough friends with them that you can talk openly about that stuff. Education, like with anything, is key to kind of understand what you're getting yourself into and how the market works and stuff like that. But it's also not easily accessible, and some people aren't so open about talking about it, or it's an interesting thing. It's hard to navigate it, and I'm not quite sure how I did, other than having people that I could talk to about it.
Which leads into my last question.
Yahoo!
Which is, and I feel like actually this whole like 40 minutes has been like really good advice.
Oh, you're so cute.
So I don't know,
I'm so shy.
No, you're doing great. You're killing the game.
Thanks.
What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Good question. It's something I would even say to myself now, and it's kind of a constant reminder, but if I could pound it into my tiny 12-year-old head, I would have just tried to instill a greater sense of confidence.
Yeah.
You know, confidence in, if not your current abilities, your ability to work your butt off until you get where you're going to want to be, or even patience in getting there, because I think I'm super hard on myself, as many circus artists are, and that's both a blessing and a curse. because you can work your butt off it motivates you to work your butt off because you want to be able to achieve whatever it is you set your mind out to. But if you're, doing your head in with, on yourself every day about, what you're not instead of what you are, if I could switch that in my head from a younger age, I think it hinders you eventually. If I would have been able to switch that from a young age, I think I would have been able to reach out further. And for whatever reason, maybe I wasn't supposed to, but it's still something that I have, just to be a bit more patient with yourself. Work your butt off, but be patient. That's kind of the balance. And it's tricky, and it's something I still struggle with, to be honest. And working on it. I'm hoping it's coming with age. It's definitely improved since, I was younger, for sure. But yeah, I'm thankful to be hard on myself because I think it's eventually what makes people good at things.
Totally.
And it takes a little bit of, obsessiveness to make it in this industry, but too much of it is also really not helpful. So trying to find that balance, did you see this thing circulating on whatever it was, Facebook or whatever, and it's like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life was crossed out at the end, but it said I forget it, I'm gonna fuck it up.
Yeah,
but it's like you're gonna take everything super personal and
yeah.
It's a bit like this, just learning how to give yourself the time to blossom a bit.
And the trust that you will. I think that's like
huge.
That's what you learn with age, is that like you have this time you can look back on and be like, oh, actually, like, I did get better.
Absolutely.
And I did get this job.
And just to not to
work.
forget to do that, which sounds so simple, but I think when you constantly are looking forward, which is super cool because it means you're focused on the next step, don't forget to turn around and go, okay, wait, I have done this and this and this and this.
Totally.
And yeah, because that's also a cool motivation when you can look back and say, okay, I'm proud of this. All right, now let's fuck this shit up. I got this. That kind of thing.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Mandi.
Hey, Shannon, you're
awesome.
a rock star. I love your podcast, and I'm super happy that you're doing it. And thanks for having me.
That was my interview with Mandi Orozco. I cannot thank Mandi enough for coming on the show. She was an artist that I used to watch when I was in Vermont training at a small program there. And I remember watching her graduation act, which I will put a link to in the show notes, and just being in awe of her movement quality. And I'm sure she's listening to this and blushing right now. But Mandi, you've always been a badass. And so being able to sit with you and record this interview and introduce you to my audience is my absolute pleasure. For me, this discussion we had was such a great reminder that everyone starts out as a beginner in something at some time. Mandi did a really great job of kind of vocalizing this struggle and overcoming struggle, this constant need, I think most artists who are evolving or who continue to push through have a fascination with, which is you start out on something and you're really bad at it and you figure it out and then you're good at it and then you get bored. And so you have to be bad at the next thing. And I know that's a hard thing to believe when you see the mastery of some people like Mandi or other guests I've had on the show, but it's really true. They started somewhere as well. And I love how Mandi said that she didn't feel like she really has any more willpower than anyone else, right? Like she doesn't think that, and I don't think it requires like a certain special kind of human to overcome these struggles. I think that when you're really passionate about something, you can really kind of find that, what she calls the fuck it, I'm going to stick it out kind of mentality. The other point Mandi brought up that I really love is this idea of being able to look back from where you came from. I think a lot of times when we get stuck in this goal-oriented mode of being like, I want to master this trick, or I want to work for Cirque du Soleil, I have these goals. It's always forward, forward, forward. But something that can really motivate you is to look back and see how far you've come and see what you've already mastered. Because if you can look back, you can find proof that you can do it again, but bigger and better. Just like Mandi. Thanks again, Mandi. If you guys want to learn more about Miss Orozco, she is on Instagram at Miss MISS _Iron Mandi, MANDI. And her website is mandy-o.com, but she hasn't updated it in a while because she's been busy being a working girl. Mad respect for that. So definitely give her a follow on Instagram at Miss _Iron Mandi. And as I said before, I will put links to her amazing routines, her treadmill act, as well as her tissue act. And those will be in the show notes at theartistathlete.com/podcasts. As for me, you can follow me for aerial training tips and inspiration. I'm on Instagram at @the_artist_athlete. I'm on Facebook, The Artist Athlete. And you can go to theartistathlete.com to read more. Thanks for listening, friends, fans, and enemies. I'll talk at you next week. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hi, I'm Katie Betts, and I'm the director of Shared Culture Concepts, which is a full-service marketing company for circus and performing arts. You can visit our website at www.sharedcultureconcepts.com. On the website, you can find a copy of our ebook, which covers basics of marketing, specifically for circus educators, coaches, studio owners, and circus artists.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast. Straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So, if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and ropes by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm on Patreon.
Hello all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.